Welcome to Books and More. I'm your host, William Cooper, and delighted to have Sarah Lyall with the New York Times here today. Sarah, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, why don't we get started with you sharing with us your background at the Times? I know you've held lots of jobs in lots of places and had a great career there. Maybe you could just tell us about it.
I'm a bit of a rarity. As a newspaper person, I've only ever worked for the New York Times. I grew up in New York, like a lot of New Yorkers, loved the paper, was a bit obsessed with it, and wanted to be a newspaper reporter after college. And I got a job in Washington as a news assistant in the Washington Bureau, and then just kind of worked my way up. And I've been here a really long time. And I've worked on Metro. I covered Long Island. I covered the first Cuomo administration with Mario Cuomo in Albany. Um, and then I covered book publishing in the 90s and met my now ex-husband, who is a British book publisher, and I lived in London for 20 years as a foreign correspondent. And now I'm back in New York as a writer at large, but doing a lot with books right now.
And what does it mean technically to be a writer at large?
It's more of a sort of accounting issue or a designation issue in that most people at the Times are assigned to a desk and they do almost all their work for that desk. So you can imagine a Metro reporter just, has a beat, covers New York City. And I've had that for most of my career. In London, though, when you're a foreign correspondent, or at least when I was, you were a total generalist. So I covered news, I did features, I covered the arts, I traveled to other countries, and I enjoyed it so much working for so many different desks that when I moved back about 10 years ago, I asked if I could keep doing that. And I was lucky and they said yes. So I'm a writer at large. And it means I can write for other desks. I mean, as I say, right now I'm mostly writing for the book section because I love it so much, but I do write for other sections. And one of the things I love about my job is every year I get to cover the dog show in New York, the Westminster Kennel Club dog show. And we have a little team of people who are the dog reporters, and it's really fun.
Awesome. Well, two-part question, given that you've had so many different roles. One is, was there a favorite? And then the second is, any advice for aspiring journalists to have such a diverse career with all these different
Well,
experiences?
London was the best. I mean, it's really more fun when you work for a paper to be away from your bosses as much as possible. And time difference was in my favor. And when most of the time I was there, it wasn't the same 24-hour news cycle you have now. So there really was a break in the day. And I had a kind of morning almost to myself in London before anyone woke up in New York. And of course, it's different now. And I have to say, I moved back to the United States right around, right before the 2016 election. I actually went back to England to cover Brexit, and then the aftermath of Brexit in some ways was our election. And I found when I covered that kind of stuff in England, when I covered, government issues, malfeasance, the decline in services, whatever it was a little bit easier for me because when you're a foreign correspondent, you have a remove from what you're thinking about. You're not implicated in any way. You can look at it as a separate thing that's interesting. I found when I came back, I worry about politics here. I worry about the state of the country, and I took it much more personally. So in a way, I miss having the that sort of sense of being an outsider looking in that I had when I was abroad.
That makes a lot of sense. And I must say, quiet mornings without a boss. What a wonderful
Yeah, exactly.
combination.
No, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Um, why don't we pivot a little bit to what you're doing now, which is focusing mostly on books. How did that come about, and what's your favorite
Well, it
part of
was
it?
a little bit post-pandemic, post-pandemic. So during the pandemic, I had been assigned to the politics desk to cover the 2020 election. And if you can imagine, that was a hellhole. One of the last things I did, one of the last trips I made was to the Iowa caucuses, in whatever that was, March or February of 2020. And I went to one more event in Vermont, a political event, and then the rest of it was all from home. And the tone of the election was so awful. Um, and how our newspaper, how the New York Times was vilified by the government at the time as a player in the sort of national conversation the way we never had. I've always prided myself in the sort of job I do because I feel we really are, as reporters, impartial. We really do try to get all sides. The editorial page is different from the news pages. And it was the first time, and before the shutdown, I went to uh, some events, and I was really horrified to see the hatred in from people who didn't even read the paper, who just assumed that what the people in the government were saying about fake news was true. It was really hard to fight back against that. And then we were all at home and everything, so we're all so stressed out and trying to cover it and calling people who don't want to talk to you again, the first time in my career. Some people don't want you to delve into their story, but I've never had government officials or politicians not want to talk to the New York Times. That was awful. And so after that, I was like, maybe I could just write about books for a while. And one of the things I did during the pandemic, one of the editors on the books desk just said, "Do you want to do a couple of the thrillers columns?" Because our thrillers columnist was retiring, and so I did it, and then somehow I just kept doing it, and now I do it. I do it every month. I write a thrillers column, and I write a lot of features, and lately it's been a lot of books features. So profiles of authors mostly, and I'm on the podcast sometimes, interviewing authors or chatting with my colleagues about books.
That's awesome. And yes, I can see how the world in recent years can drive somebody to want to live in fiction for a living.
A little bit. I'm still really interested in the news, but it's more stressful. And I really love a job where when you wake up in the morning, you can actually just read a novel for an hour before you even look at your computer, which I do sometimes. It's
That
really nice.
sounds great. Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like the line between nonfiction and fiction's blurring just because of
Yeah.
how the world we live in. I mean, if
Yeah.
people describe some of the things that we see on almost a daily basis 20 years ago, it would have been a novel, not reality.
Exactly. No, it's true. And certainly the dystopian novels that predict, crises in the future seem a little closer to reality sometimes than we would hope for. So,
Agreed. Agreed. As far as the books you're reading now and writing about now, any stand out that you'd like to talk about?
yeah, well, I did a trip to England recently. I'm doing a lot of stuff about Jane Austen. It's her 250th anniversary of her birth. And it turns out there's an unlimited number of things you can write that are new about Jane Austen, even though she died all those centuries ago. And one of the things that's been really fun is covering a lot of the events around this anniversary and getting to talk to a lot of Jane Austen enthusiasts. And the great thing about Jane Austen is the books are so fun. The plots are so good, the stories are so delicious, the humor is so delicious, but also they really do reward deep, close reading. For things you wouldn't have thought of. So even in just learning more about Jane Austen this year, and anyone who knows about her would know this already, but she pioneered a type of writing or built on a type of writing that hadn't been in use much, in which the narrator takes on characteristics of different characters and writes as a narrator in those people's voices from their points of view. And it was a kind of revolutionary thing, and her books are full of things like that. And it turns out also scholars love Jane Austen and amateurs love Jane Austen, and it's a big tent taking in anyone from the costume folks who just want to put on a gown and a bonnet to the PhD people in universities who are doing really, really serious scholarly works. And then I had the great privilege in the last month or so of doing a piece on Ian McEwan's new book, and Ian McEwan, who I talked to in London about this great book, What We Can Know, that's set in the future. But it's extraordinary. I would really recommend it to everyone, especially people who liked Atonement, which is one of the great novels in our era, I think. I think
Yeah.
it's may well be as good as that. And then
Wow.
a real personal hero of mine, Philip Pullman, who's his Dark Materials trilogy I read when it came out 25 years ago, and they're young adult books that are the most extraordinary, both fantasy but also deeply embedded in philosophy and history and science and math um, and they speak to really big issues of free will and religion, and they're amazing. And he wrote that first trilogy, and then he wrote a second trilogy starring his great heroine, Lyra Silvertongue. And he just wrote the last book in the second series, so the sixth book in the Lyra cycle. And he's getting on now, and he's in the late 70s. He's not as nimble as he was. And so to get to meet him at this incredible moment was really an honor, actually.
That's awesome. What a dream job. You get to
Yeah, it's a
meet
really
these
fun job.
people and
Yeah.
talk to them and then write about it. And like you said, read a book for
Read a book. Yeah.
it's work. You
And
wake up and read a book and you're working.
but also it's like I do review thrillers and I do other book reviews as well, but I'm not really a reviewer. I don't really feel I personally have a better understanding of, or I maybe I do. I read a lot, but I don't have the right to declaim on other people's work. And I do find as I get older, it's harder actually, because I know how much work goes into writing a book. I wrote a book a while back, and it's, several years of really hard work, and it comes out, and it turns out some people don't like it as much as you hope they would. And it's a lot to read a bad review of something that you cared a lot about and spent a lot of time on. And at least in my thrillers column, I won't review a book by an unknown thriller writer that I didn't like. In other words, if I look at a lot every
Yeah.
month to choose the ones I want, and if it's some new person who's written a first novel and it's not very good, I don't see any point in elevating it to, other people's attention and then trashing it. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. That's great. And you're right. I mean, especially book. I mean, even a column takes a long time, but a book, you got to get every word, 300
Well,
pages and every
yeah,
line just
yeah.
right.
Yeah, but it's sort of more than that. It's part of yourself, and it is a much bigger project than writing for newspaper. And then people, you're really vulnerable out there.
Yeah.
Someone just might not like that kind of book. Someone might not share your sense of humor. Someone might have read something similar they liked better. Or there are people who like review the book they wish your book had been, but that was, they say it should have been all these things, but that wasn't what you were trying to do, you know?
Yeah. I
So,
take solace with the books that I've written where I'll go on Goodreads, for example, and I'll see some book that's like won the Pulitzer Prize that I find absolutely brilliant, and the average rating will be like 3.8, and I'll
yeah.
just be reminded that it's very subjective and
It's
uh,
completely subjective. And I think in some ways it's a mistake to even read that because some readers, it's a little bit like Jane Austen, it has such a broad range of things that people bring to it. And some people read, they honestly are just like, do I relate to the hero or not? And then other people are comparing it to literature they've read before and really doing a deeper, and there's no right or wrong way. But if you
yeah,
subject yourself to all those points of view, and some people are just like, this character's not relatable or whatever, it's really dispiriting to read a lot of that. And in my case, I wrote a book about that was essays about the UK from my time there, and it was supposed to be funny. And a lot of it was expanded versions of pieces I'd written, but with a lot more of myself in there. And just some people don't think I'm very funny, and some people do. I think some British lovers of the UK want to read like sort of masterpiece theater style, just you know, respectful sort of look how quirky they are rather than, and that's not sort of how I write. I don't think my book was mean, but just some people didn't like the tone.
yeah,
And I stopped reading the review those comments like on Amazon because it just made me feel so bad.
yeah. Everybody brings their whole life to whatever book's in
Yeah,
their
yeah,
hands, and for me,
yeah.
it's even in the same author. Remains of the Day is my favorite novel. I cannot read Never Let Me Go. It just doesn't click. It's the
I so
exact same author.
disagree. I so disagree. I love Ishiguro. And I think all of Ishiguro's, I mean, he's written about such different subjects, but
Yeah,
his books are really at the heart, I think, about loneliness, about the inability to connect with other people, about, sort of the human condition of a sort of melancholy, you know, um, aloneness, I guess is the right thing to say. I love
yeah,
Never Let Me Go. I love
yeah.
Clara and the Sun, which some people didn't love
I
either.
couldn't I couldn't get into that either. And literally, Remains of the Day is my favorite book.
Yeah.
So it's the same person, and maybe I just need to give it another try because if I can
No,
get in,
but
go ahead.
Never Let Me Go also it puts up some people are put off because they're like it's sort of sci-fi-ish, it's not set in it's set in there's like there's the thing with the characters who are being raised in order to harvest their organs, yet what's so incredible is how he makes them real characters and imbues them with the, thoughts and emotions of people. Um, but if you sort of just look beyond the kind of weird plot device that he's doing and look at this as a deeply moving story about people facing their own mortality earlier than we would and
Yeah,
trying to find love and connection in an environment where at any moment they could be plucked out of it and
yeah,
knowing how short their lives are. And that's universal, I think, except
yeah,
they had a shorter life than we do.
yeah. It's a very powerful premise, and it got me to think if you have a compressed lifespan, you want to get more out of what you have, and maybe that's what you should be doing anyway, right? And so there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
It was almost, I think, what you said about the sort of sci-fi part,
But
but
I don't think, I mean, I don't think he's not a sci-fi writer, but he's experimenting a little bit with some of these things. Claire and the Sun is about a human style robot, but they're not, none of them are really about those things. They're really about human connection and love and how we handle the fact that we're all mortal, you know?
yeah, absolutely. Um, do you have any advice for aspiring journalists to,
It's such a hard question, and I wish I had better advice. The way I did it just doesn't exist so much anymore.
yeah,
Most people at the Times started their careers at small papers, then maybe worked up to medium paper that did really well, and then moved here. And so many small papers don't exist anymore. I do think if you're willing to sort of live in a not huge place, and really maybe not make very much money in the beginning of your career, there's a crying need for local journalism.
oh
And
yeah,
local journalism was great. Like when I covered Long Island, it was like covering a small town in a way, you know, because the issues are the issues, but in a local way, you really are right there seeing it all happen, the school board, the police, all that sort of stuff. And people now have to be much more nimble and able to do it all digital, all electronically. Sometimes some outlets don't have a printed copy, but writing is writing. And I mean, Ian McEwan actually said this, I saw recently, we didn't discuss this, but someone asked him about advice for writers, and he said, so important to get away from your phone and your computer for periods of time each day with just your own thoughts. That's less for journalism because we need to, but in terms of just writing, like I did a piece also on Susan Orlean, who has a wonderful new book out, which is a great almost manual for how to be a nonfiction writer as well. And it's really inspiring for anyone who wants to write because she has such a love of her job. And because she's so good at getting stories, like she says, half the battle is finding something interesting to write about, and then just being all in with enthusiasm for it. So she says, I actually forgot what I was going to say that she said about this, but oh, I know. She says that one of her first editors taught her the different stages of writing a long form or a nonfiction piece, do the interviews, do the research, and then before you start writing, sit and think about it for a while. You don't have to start writing right away. I mean, a daily newspaper reporter does. I'm pretty good at going somewhere and writing 800 words an hour later, but for any feature, it's really good to let it marinate for a bit before you start putting things to the screen. And I do think in the old days when people wrote longhand and maybe then typed it into their machine, they maybe thought harder about how to structure the piece before they began. One of the issues, I'm sure you feel this too, when we have the computer in front of us, you can make infinite changes in no time at all, and maybe you're not thinking hard enough about how to place the words before you start typing.
It's a great point and so true. And the McEwen point was so true.
Yeah,
Got to
yeah,
get away from screens and lights and buttons and
yeah. And
just
just be with your, have some faith in the ability of your brain to keep itself occupied without all these bells and whistles all the time.
absolutely. Well, we're almost at a close. Your time's been really, really great, and we appreciate
Been
it.
really nice to talk to you. I so appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Last question is, what do you see yourself in the future? You've done so many different things, and 5 years from now, is it going to be something totally different,
I
or do you
don't
not
know.
know?
The
Or
one of the nice things about the Times is there are sort of infinite things. I do like my little book section now. I like work. My colleagues are unbelievable. I mean, imagine having a job where you can go in and just chat about fiction to your friends. So I'll do more of that. I hope to do more on our podcast. We have a very nice book review podcast. And I love this. I love my newspaper so much. So I'm just very happy to work here.
awesome. And yes, the book review podcast of the Times is spectacular. One of
Yeah.
the absolute best.
Oh, that's
Well,
very nice.
thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate having you on, and
My pleasure.
look forward to continuing to enjoy your work.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you.